Today we're going to talk about the vocabulary for Module 3. We are going to use this sheet quite a bit because Module 3 is just all about understanding the vocabulary. So the first thing is a function. So the function is the drawn line, like what we draw on a graph. And to know if it's a true function, it has to pass the vertical line test. All right, so the next word we have is domain. So domain is found on the x-axis. We're looking at this line. And we're looking at all of the x-axis for the function. And we read it from left to right, so the smallest number to the biggest number. And the notation we use is inequality, which we've learned before, or the interval notation, which uses brackets, and that's what we're going to be learning for this unit. Next, we have the range, which is very similar to domain, except it's the y-axis values. So that means we're looking at the y-axis, the up and down line. And again, we're looking at all of the y values for the particular function. We go from the bottom to the top because that's how we go from smallest to biggest numbers. And then again, we're going to use inequality or interval notation. Now, interval notation we're going to do heavy on, but inequality we will also talk about and refresh our brains. All right, next up we have when it's increasing. So increasing again looks at the x-axis, very similar to domain, except we're only looking at the x values where we're going up. So on our graph, it's when it's going up when we read from left to right. And we'll only be using interval notation for increasing. Decreasing, again, is looking at the x-axis values, but this time we're only looking at the ones where the graph goes down. So we read that from left to right, and again, interval notation. Next word is going to be constant. So again, x-axis values, but this is where on our graph it's going to be flat. So it's just going straight. It doesn't go up or down. And then we go from left to right, and we will again use interval notation. All right, next up we have maximum. So you find this at the top of the function, and you find it by looking for the highest peak of a function. And the notation, you can either write it as a point, which is x comma y, or if y equals a number, if it is a line. So like if it's not just like a peak, but if it's like a straight line that goes across is the top of our function. All right, minimum, it's the same thing as maximum, except we're looking at the bottom of the function. We're looking for the lowest point of the function. And again, it'll be a point x comma y if it's like, if it's kind of like the bottom of a valley in our graph, or if it's a line, like a straight line at the bottom, it's gonna be y equals whatever that number is. All right, next up we have is x-intercepts. So x-intercepts is on the x-axis, and it's where the function goes through the x-axis, okay? And we always write it as a point x comma 0. It's always going to be 0. This x just depends on what the number is that it passes through at. And then since we have x-intercepts, we are also going to have y-intercepts. So y-intercepts are the y-axis, and that's where the function goes through the y-axis. And again, it's going to be a point, but this time it's going to go 0 comma your y. So whatever number it's passing through at, that's what's going to replace this y. That 0, always going to be 0. This 0, always going to be a 0. And that's all again for x-intercepts and y-intercepts. And then lastly, we have f of x equals y. We're going to see stuff like this. So we're looking either at the x-axis or the y-axis. So basically, we're going to use that function that's drawn to find the number partner on the graph. So you can either write it as x equals the number or y equals the number. It depends on what you are looking for. Okay, now let's flip to the back. All right, so the two notations for domain, range, increase, decrease, constant are either going to be inequality or bracket, aka interval notation. So let's start with inequality because we've done that before. So if we see a closed dot, we are going to use this mouth, okay? The mouth with the line. If we see a line as our left or our right, so a nice solid line that's part of what we draw, then again, we're going to use the mouth with the line. So this is the new part right here. If we see an open dot on our graph for the left or for the right, then we are going to use just a mouth, okay? And I should also say for the bottom or top for the range. If we see arrows, we will also use just the mouth. And again, this is for the inequality notation. And we can't forget with inequality notation, we have to use those squiggly brackets in between, okay? All right, next up we have interval or bracket notation. I'm going to kind of use these words interchangeably, so they do mean the same thing. So if you have a closed bracket, which are called squared brackets as well, it looks like a little bit half of a square. And then when you have open brackets, these are round, it looks like parentheses, like regular old parentheses, okay? But we call them round or open brackets, okay? That's important. They give a different name. It's like a nickname, you know what I mean? So if we have a closed dot, well, we're going to use the closed brackets. And if we see a line on our graph for when we need to use a bracket notation, again, we are going to use those closed brackets. So these guys are cousins of the mouth with the line, okay? So the square brackets are cousins. They do the same thing for the same type of lines or closed dots. So in that case, then saying that, round brackets are for open dots or for arrows, okay? So just like when we use just the mouth, okay? So these are cousins, they work for the same type of thing. The next bit is, what do arrows mean? So they mean forever in the direction that it points. And do you remember what the mathy term for forever is? So it's infinity, and we can write it as a negative infinity or a positive infinity. And here's all the different arrows. So up arrows are positive infinities. A down arrow that looks like this is going to be a negative infinity. If we have arrows going to the left, that's going to be a negative infinity. And if we have arrows going to the right, we're going to have a positive infinity. That's the end of the vocabulary / bracket notation that you'll need. Keep this page handy. We are going to use this page so much.